The October 10th Ascension Parish Zoning Commission meeting will now come to order. Madam Secretary, will you please note that all commissioners are present? Would you please introduce yourself for the record? Madam Secretary, just you.
Patrice Johnson.
Someone has a case of laryngitis.
We're going to put that on YouTube.
That's our normal voice.
Okay, a motion to accept the minutes of the September 12th zoning meeting.
So moved.
Mr. Bishop. Second. Mr. Sanji. All in favor?
Aye.
Chair has no comments. I'm going to go out on a limb and say we have no public comment period. Mr. Compton.
We placed several items in your packet. One is simply for information, and that's the first item, 12-12. I was speaking to another commissioner earlier, and he said that he saw this item come up at strategic planning and didn't realize why it was in our packet. And the reason I put it in your packet was just to make you aware of the discussion that's going on. I was asked by one of the councilmen to show how we might reduce the density of residential in our commercial zoning categories. And so what I did is I included an existing copy of our zoning tables and a proposed copy. And so if you just compare the mixed use 1, the mixed use 2, and the crossroads commercial, the changes are quite simple. In mixed use 1, we're reducing the single family density from 8 units an acre to 4. We're reducing the duplex and zero lot line from 10 units an acre to 5. And we're reducing multifamily residential from 20 to 8. Those changes are reflected again in the crossroads commercial zoning category. And one of the discussions was about zero lot line houses and thinking that the setbacks might need to be adjusted. And so we talked about simply doubling what the existing side setback is from 5 feet to 10, and then you would meet the same building separation that you get in a standard subdivision in a zero lot line. One of the questions that we have gotten is why would we consider this in Ascension Parish? And the answer that I have been given by the councilman is that the infrastructure to support high-density housing really doesn't exist in Ascension Parish. And so by reducing the allowable density in these zoning categories, you're getting a little bit more in line with the available infrastructure. I think that there's going to be some debate as we move forward as to whether or not Ascension Parish wants to ever have another apartment complex, because by reducing your density from 20 to 8, you are never going to get another apartment complex. It just will not be fiscally or financially possible. You can do multifamily housing at a lower density. It just won't be apartments. It'll be condos or something else.
Do you think we're ready to put this to?
No, this is for information only. This is still in strategic planning. I would speculate that next month, which will be, I guess, at the November strategic planning meeting, they will possibly make a recommendation, and that will come back to you guys as a recommendation from strategic planning to look at. We'll look at it again next month and then decide if we want to have a public hearing in December.
Right. Okay.
The next item, and it's actually the next 3 items, were items that they're repeat items in the sense that when the master planning process was through and we were trying to figure out what were some of the things that we could address based on comments that we had heard during that process, these are 3 ordinances that we thought, based on what we were hearing in those master plan meetings, that met a lot of the concerns about the PUDs and SPUDs that were being approved in this parish. The first item is, how do you calculate residential density on a parcel of land? And what this does is, currently our code allows you to just simply use the gross land area. So if a parcel of land is 100 acres, you'd multiply that 100 times whatever the allowed density is, be it 3, 2, or 1 unit per acre, and that's the number of units you can do. What this revision does is that it requires you to calculate a net site area, by subtracting out all pipeline servitudes, right-of-ways, existing road right-of-ways, existing drainage servitudes, unmitigated wetlands, and existing water bodies from the gross site area. So anything that you can't physically build on, reduce it from your gross site area, you have a net site area, and that's how you're going to calculate the allowable density. So if it's 100 acres and you have a 30-acre unmitigated wetland and 10 acres of pipeline servitude, you've just reduced your buildable area by 40 acres. So now you have 60 times whatever your allowed density is. So that's the first ordinance that we're talking about today. Questions, comments, criticism?
That makes sense.
Okay, so do we want to have a public hearing on this next month?
I would say.
Okay. Entertain a motion.
And the pushback would come from developers?
Or landowners who have now potentially lost some developable area of their land?
Right, so you make $1 million piece of land worth 40,000.
Well, you're saying they're losing developable area, but you're saying the area is not developable anyway.
Well, but he would have
A
been able to.
servitude would be.
You would have been able to
to
put
use that
100
entire
houses
amount.
instead of 10 houses now on a
It's-
100-acre piece of land.
Well, okay, so let's just use some math here. If you have a 100-acre parcel of land, which is going to be rare in this parish anyway, but 100 acres today that's zoned, let's just say 3 units an acre. Because of the way the code is written, where the minimum lot size is, I believe, 70 by 150, you can't fit 3 units an acre anyway. Once you put roads and stormwater and all the other stuff that it takes to make a subdivision, you really only get to about 2.3, 2.4 units per acre anyway, using the base code. The PUD allows you to reduce your lot size so that you can get a heck of a lot closer to that allowed density, which is 3 units an acre. So what we're saying is if you have a 100-acre piece of land and you can get, you've got 60 acres of developable land left, you can get 180 units on that 60 acres, but base zoning would only allow you to do 70 by 150 anyway, which is going to be a lot lower than that number, but the PUD's going to allow you to build a smaller lot, maybe a 50 by 120 or, you know, a townhouse product, something smaller, but allow you to get to your density that you're allowed to. That's simply what this does, is it simply says your density is only based on what you can build on anyway.
Entertain a motion to bring it for a public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
In favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. All right.
Okay, so one of the other significant complaints we got during the master plan process was that we love our zoning map. Our zoning map is the gospel. And when you allow someone to do a PUD or a SPUD, you're allowing them to desecrate that zoning map by allowing them to increase the density. What this ordinance change says is that whatever your base zoning is today, that's the density that you're going to be allowed to get with your PUD or your SPUD. So if you have 100 units per 100 acres, okay, and let's call that our net number so the math is a lot easier. 3 units an acre, you're allowed 300 units. We're not going to allow you to rezone that property to a SPUD and get 1,000 units all of a sudden, okay? So on 100 acres at 3 units an acre, you're only going to be allowed 300 units. But that developer may want to build something that's smaller than what the code allows, which is 70 by 150. If he wants to build 20-foot lots, but his number of units can never exceed what base zoning allows, what's the problem here? So the base zoning number, 3 units, 2 units, or 1 unit per acre is where we're going to hold them to that density. The lot size is what they're going to get flexibility with. They also may get some use because they're doing a PUD. They may get some commercial use out on the highway or in a node or whatever. You know, the PUD mechanism allows them to create those mixing of uses, but what we're saying is the density that you are before you rezone to a PUD will never be exceeded from what you are today.
The residential density.
Residential density.
But on top of that, you could have some commercial.
Yes, sir. And today, once again, this is going to be up for some debate. Today, I'm not saying that utilizing land as commercial takes away from your residential density. So let's say I've got a 100-acre site and I want to do 50 acres of commercial and 50 acres of residential. Now I'm fitting my allowed residential density on half of the acreage, right? Because half of it I'm using as commercial. Now I'm fitting my allowed residential density on half of the acreage. That's one of those things with a PUD. That will be resolved when they submit their traffic study to see if there are major impacts to the roads and whatnot. But what we're saying is the density shall not exceed what base zoning is today.
Motion for public hearing.
So moved.
Mr. Callender, second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passed.
Okay, the last item to me was the no-brainer because when I arrived here 4.5 years ago, there were several PUDs and SPUDs that had been approved and many that had already started construction and were moving through the development process. What this ordinance does is it says when you get your PUD ordinance approved, meaning you have been rezoned and you're ready to start submitting plans or construction plans, you have got to get your developer's agreement approved at that time. The developer's agreement goes with the land for a minimum, I believe, of 7 years after it's adopted by ordinance. So if a property, i.e. Orange Grove, had that developer's agreement in place when it was annexed into the city could not have allowed that developer to abandon all the conditions that that developer had gotten put in place when they got the development approved, i.e. the sidewalks, the park, the fire station. All those conditions of approval that the parish put on them were abandoned when it was annexed into the city because there was no developer's agreement. We're saying the developer's agreement needs to be put in place when the ordinance is passed to approve the PUD. And I recognize we may have to come back and amend the developer's agreement after the fact because we may miss something, maybe something that changes, but get the developer's agreement in place when the PUD is approved. That way there's no, hey, did we ever get a developer's agreement for this property? No, well, they're half built. How are we going to get them to do what we want them to do? So that's what this ordinance does. It simply says change the timing of the developer's agreement to go with the PUD approval.
So you're really saying it's a requirement?
It's a
Before the
requirement
thing is-
today, before a final plat can be signed on a PUD, that a developer's agreement is executed and approved by ordinance. I can point to 3 of them that it didn't happen. Just didn't happen. It got missed.
Right. I'm just kind of going towards the title. The title reads, we approve it at the same time. I think what you're saying is it has to be approved or the land's not going to be approved.
Correct.
So I would just change the title to kind
Okay. I'm open to suggestions.
I don't have one other than to change the title.
I'll work on
You
that.
know, something that's a requirement.
Okay.
I guess. what I'm looking
Required developers agreements when a PUD or SPUD is approved.
for. Yes, you got it. All right. Motion to approve the public hearing?
I so move.
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any other business? Motion for adjournment?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
No one was gonna move. I'll second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
We're done. Thank you.